Hello everyone and welcome to a remarkable game from round 5 of this year's Tata Steel Masters edition. It is world champion Magnus Carlsen against Nodirbek Abdusattorov. Both of them have had a great tournament so far. Out of the 4 games that they've played, Magnus suffered his first loss, but Abdusattorov got 2 wins and 2 draws, beating Maxulu and Richard Rapport. And now he faces Magnus Carlsen with a black piece. It doesn't get better than that. And also, let's check out how Magnus bounced back after his loss to Giri in the previous round. So Magnus with the white pieces opens with pawn to c4. He goes for the English opening. We have c5, knight to f3, knight to f6, and now knight to c3. Magnus goes for the 4 knights of the English, or rather 3 knights, but Abdusattorov plays knight to c6, and we have the 4 knights of the English, the symmetrical line, e3, we have pawn to e5, and now usually you will see d4 here, but I guess Magnus thought that, okay, as this is the main line, obviously, Nodirbek knows this all too well. Let's try to mix it up a little bit. He plays bishop to e2, and now Nodirbek grabs the full center with d5. So of course you're gonna capture here. You could also play d4 here, that's also possible, but Magnus does capture. We have knight captures and Magnus castles here. We have bishop to e7, and now bishop back to b5. Now putting pressure on that e5 pawn. Now knight captures on e5 is a threat. Knight captures on c3, b captures on c3, and now just queen to c7, adding a defender to the pawn. Magnus strikes with d4, we have c captures, e captures, and now knight captures on d4. And there is one game in the database where castles was played, but here we have bishop to d7 by Nodirbek, and it is now as of move 12 that we have a completely new game. So Magnus goes back, knight to f3. He doesn't want to unnecessarily trade pieces, as that will diminish his chances of actually winning, and he would very much like to win this game after losing the previous one to Anish. And here we have bishop to f6, just going after that rook on a1. It seems like a tricky move and a very risky one, as your king is still in the center of the board, and Magnus definitely did his best to try and exploit this. Now you could move the rook with something like rook to b1, but Magnus goes bishop to a3. He stops the black king from escaping to the king side, and he offers his rook on a1. So it's a sacrifice of the exchange. Nodirbek captures it, as it is the best move. We have queen captures on a1, and now Nodirbek just castles here. Now you could also try to defend some pawns here, but as Magnus castled kingside, Nodirbek says that he will voluntarily give up those pawns in order to be able to attack the white king. But just in case you're wondering, yes, you can play f6, but it's very tricky. Look at this, rook to c1, and now if castles queenside, now there are moves like bishop to e7, and now it's a very, very tricky position where it's hard to say what to play. Do you move the rook, or do you go for this queen sacrifice, or basically you're going to have queen for 2 rooks. Now after rook captures and c7 king captures, you have 2 rooks for the white queen, so it's it should be playable. But Nodirbek says nope, I want to keep the queens on the board, and I want if you decide to capture back some material, I'm going to attack you on the king side. So first rook to c1 by Magnus, we have king to b8, getting the king out of that nasty c file, and now queen captures on g7. Not afraid to open up the g file and regain some material. We have rook h to g8, and now comes queen back to b2. Here, very interesting is to actually capture the pawn, because you allow black to infiltrate your king side. For example, bishop to g4 now attacks the knight, bishop to e2, and now you eliminate it to remove one of the defenders of the h2 pawn. Bishop captures on f3, and now rook to h8, and now you are breaking through here on the h2 square. But now after, let's say, queen to c2 and queen captures on h2, it doesn't really matter. After king to f1, you are okay here. There's no good way to take advantage of this with black. But still, for example, queen to h7, you can offer a queen trade, and now either white accepts this, or white should keep the queens on the board as he is down material. Now we're going to see something like rook to c8, and now well, it's anyone's guess, but probably bishop to g3, guarding the h1 square. If you go for the tricky bishop captures on c6, threatening checkmate, black can just capture here. And now if you go greedy for rook captures on c6, now you even get checkmated. Queen d3 check, and now whatever you do, you just get checkmated. So well, Well, it's possible to play this. Maybe you know, it's easier to not capture on h7. So Magnus goes back, queen to b2, and now bishop to g4. Very nicely done. Now threatening bishop captures on f3, and Magnus goes back, knight to e1. The knight is very well placed here, guarding the g2 pawn. And Magnus spent some 30 minutes on this knight to f1 move, as it's not an easy position to handle. So here, rook to d1, getting rid of one of Magnus's very strong attackers, the rook on c1. Magnus trades here, rook captures, bishop captures, and now bishop back to f1, adding more defense to the king side here. And now knight to e5. Here, knight to e5, well, it is a fine move. There is a much nicer one. Bishop to g4, just to show you how the engine is thinking. Now, here white wants to play h3. As soon as white plays h3, his defensive setup will be much stronger. But here after bishop to g4, you are preventing that, because now h3 will be met with bishop captures on h3. And now if, let's say, knight to d3, now you're going to play a move like king to a8, get your king to safety. And now after, let's say, knight to f4, you will play rook to d8. And now it's very dangerous. The rook can come to d1. If you stop that, let's say queen b3, then the rook can come to d2, and this is how you will, well, just grab hold of the position with black. But Nodirbek tried knight to e5, which also looks like a very nice human idea, and Magnus immediately plays h3. He says, no more g4 square for you, and now we have bishop to f3. Very nicely done by Nodirbek, just putting pressure on that g2 pawn, but also hoping that knight captures and f3 is played. Of course, if not, then he will just remaneuver his bishop on this diagonal to go after this a2 pawn. And the situation on the clock is, this is only moved 22, both players some 13 minutes on the clock. We have queen to d4 now, just centralizing the queen, and rook to d8, attacking Magnus's queen here. Queen to h4, and now bishop back to d5. Now Magnus goes after the h7 pawn, queen captures on h7, and now bishop to c4, eliminating this light square bishop, which is a very strong defender of the king side. Bishop to b2 now puts pressure on the knight, and here Nodirbek trades. Bishop captures, king captures, and now queen to c4 with check. King to g1, and now knight back to c6. We have knight to f3 by Magnus, and now queen captures on a2. Here it seems like you could go for rook to d1 check, queen to f1, but that really doesn't do all that much. For example, king h2, queen to f1, the king escapes to g3, and nothing is really happening here. If you try something like bishop to e5 check, you can just trade knight captures on e5, but now queen to h8 with check, and it's black who has problems. King to c7, queen captures on e5 with check, king to c8, queen to c5 with check, and so on. King d7, queen to f5 with check, king to e7, and now knight to e5, for example. Black is the one who will most likely lose this game. So instead, Nodirbek just goes for queen captures on a2, eliminates that pawn, and now he's ready to start pushing his a pawn forward. We have bishop back to f6, as the bishop here is also hanging. So bishop f6 with tempo attacks the rook. Now rook to d1 with check, king h2, and now pawn to a5. Now the a pawn marches down the board. Knight to d4 by Magnus, and queen to d5, just getting the queen out of the way, nicely centralizing. We have queen back to c2 now, attacking the rook, and queen to d6 with check. We have pawn to f4 by Magnus, and now Nodirbek just trades down into a beautiful endgame for him. Rook captures on d4. Now you cannot capture with the pawn because the bishop hangs, so you have to trade everything. Bishop captures, we have knight captures on d4, e captures, and now queen captures on f4 with check. Pawn to g3, and now queen captures on d4. And we have this queen and pawn endgame where Nodirbek has two connected pass pawns on the queen side, but Magnus also does have a passed h pawn. So it's very difficult to say if you can actually win this. Magnus starts pushing, and Nodirbek also continues pushing on the queen side. We have queen to a2 now, going after the f7 pawn, just pawn to f5. Magnus pushes h5, and now queen to h8. Very nicely done. Going after the h5 pawn, pawn. Queen captures on a4, queen captures on h5 with check, king to g1, and now queen to f3, attacking the g3 pawn. And this position is much trickier than you might imagine. Here Magnus has only well, he has two options that seem like they can be played, but there's really only one option that can be played, and that is queen to e8 with check. Here you have to play queen to e8 with check, and now you just harass the black king all over the board. Queen to e7 check, king to c6, queen to e6 with check, king to c5. Now you can even play queen to e7 with check, king to c4, queen to c7 with check, and you just continue harassing the black king. If you try something like queen to c6, you just go queen to f4 with check. Now you're threatening to pick up this pawn, and if black queen blocks, then you just repeat queen to c7 with check. Let's say king to d3. Now you play queen to f7, and moves such as these will keep white in the game. The problem is you can never push b5. Queen to b3 check, for example, will eliminate this pawn. So it's very difficult. It's rather impossible for black to keep an eye on the f5 pawn while also having the b5 square covered and the b7 square covered, so you don't lose any of the pawns. However, that's exactly where Magnus blunders the entire game. Instead of this queen to e8 check, he went for the other idea, king to h2, and it seems like a perfectly valid idea. You defend the king here. Your king is even safer on h2, as there are far few squares from where the black queen can check the white king. But the problem is now the game is completely winning for Nodirbek. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find the winning idea while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this brilliancy. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is queen to e2 with check. That's how you do it. The point is you cover the b5 square, and that's how you will advance the pawn. Once the pawn is advanced to b5, then the king will have many squares to start marching forward, and you will be able to hide the king behind the pawn, behind your queen, and continue advancing the pawn. And now it doesn't matter where the king goes. If you go king to h3, then a series of, let's say, queen to f1 check, king h4, and the b5 is enough to start advancing that pawn. Let's say queen to a6. You're going to play queen to c4 with check. If king goes to g5, you're going to play queen to c5, just cover every square so you don't get checked. If queen to a5, you're going to play king to b7. Now already your king is marching forward. Let's say queen to a2, queen to c4. You offer a queen trade. If queen to g2 check, king to b6, and so on and so on. Your king will march forward and help advance the passed pawn to becoming a queen. So instead of king to h3, Magnus played king to g1. But now a different problem arises. Queen to e5 now attacks the g3 pawn and also covers the b5 square from here. So here king to f2, again Magnus defends, but now pawn to b5. And you can see how in the other line where we didn't play king to h2 in that position, black never really had an option of advancing the pawn to b5. So here queen b4, now king to b7. We have pawn to g4. Magnus wants to trade the remaining pawn off the board. F captures, queen captures, and now king to b6. And now with the white king boxed in like this, the white queen will not be able to stop the advancement of the pawn. It's even too easy to do this. The only way for Magnus to survive this would be to create some sort of a trick where I don't even know how it would be possible. So here we have queen to g8, and now Nodirbek just continues advancing the pawn. Pawn to b4, we have king f3, now just king to b5. We have king back to g2, now queen to e2 with check. King g3, queen e3 check, king to g2, and now pawn to b3. The queen nicely defends the pawn. Queen to b8 with check, we have king to c4, we have queen to g8 with check, and now king to c3. The position plays itself basically. Queen to c8 with check, we have king to d2, and now queen to h8 by Magnus, sort of keeping an eye on that b2 square. but it doesn't matter. King to c2, we have queen to c8 with check. Now comes king to d1, queen to h8 once again, guarding the square, and now queen to d2 with check. We have king to g3 and pawn to b2. And here it was in this position on move 60 that Magnus got up from the table. He went to the bathroom, probably to refresh himself and to prepare himself for this new reality that he is now about to lose his second classical game in a row, which did not happen for quite a few years. I think last time that happened was in 2015 in Norway chess, but still. It's very rare that he will lose one classical game. Losing 2 games in the same tournament in a row, that's almost unimaginable. But yeah, it was here in this position that Magnus Carlsen returned to the table, sat at the board, looked at the position a little bit, and it was in this position on move 60 that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So beautifully done by Nodirbek Abdusattorov, who not only takes down the world classical champion with the black pieces, but also is now in sole lead of the Tata Steel Masters. And here you resign because if you deliver this check, let's say queen to h1 check, queen e1 check, blocks check while delivering check, now you have to trade and now the pawn will be promoted. And if you don't, if you go something like queen h7, still okay, you can play this, guards the b1 square, king to c1. And now queen to h1 check, king to c2, and now after one more check is given. If you give this check, then we block while delivering check, queen d3 blocks check and delivers check, and also if queen to c6 with check, also queen to c3 check will block check, force a trade, and now the passed pawn will be winning. So yeah, really nicely done. b2 played, and Magnus resigns a classical game. Not something anyone would have thought that would happen, especially since he had a rest day. He played some sports yesterday. He had the white pieces. I said that when Anish faced Magnus, that okay, he defeated him with the white pieces, but here Nodirbek had the black pieces against the world champion in all-time formats, and he just crushed him. So okay, Magnus played a bit of a risky line, but you know, it should definitely hold if he plays the best moves. But that's just it. Nodirbek outplayed him, and there was nothing Magnus could do. These are the standings after the few rounds that we've covered. You can see that nope, that's the wrong one. Let me just load up the actual one. Yeah, that's the right one. I excellently loaded up the wrong one. So these are the standings after there we go, after the 5 rounds that were played. Abdusattorov with 4 out of 5, an incredible result if you consider that he already faced Magnus Carlsen, followed by Anish Giri with 3.5 points, also a player who has defeated Magnus Carlsen in this tournament. Then we have with 3 points Caruana and Pragnananda, then with 2.5 points Arjun Erigaisi, Dingliren, Wesley So, and Parham Maksudlu, with 2 points Levon, Magnus Carlsen, and Richard Rapport. Absolutely incredible to see Levon and Magnus in sharing 9th and 10th place, basically in 12th and basically 12th to 14th with 1.5 point Gukesh, Jordan Van Forest, and Vincent Keimer. So incredible tournament, incredible turn of events. Every round we'll see what happens. Will Magnus be able to bounce back from 2 losses? Everyone said that he could bounce back from 1 loss, that he will just now crush everyone. But now after 2 classical losses in a row, we'll see if he will be able to bounce back and save at least a part of the tournament. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I would like to thank Ravishing Reptiles YouTube, I Love Adrian and Jude, Easy Ovens is the best, Derek King, and Richard F. Sayaj for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Tata Steel until it finishes. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.